Now, while cleaning neglected engine bays can be a bit of a chore, it needn't be an overly complicated one, as two simple product types are all you really need to get them satisfactorily spruced up. So, although I'm generally not put off by the prospect of getting down and dirty with a neglected old engine bay, I know some folk might be. While I can't promise tackling yours will be a breeze, as even with the right approach it's always going to require a certain amount of targeted elbow grease, can at least put your mind at rest in regards to required lotions and potions, as a simple all-purpose cleaner degreaser and a water-based dressing product should, in my experience, be all you need chemical-wise to bring even the grimiest of engine bays, frunks and surrounding shuts up to an acceptable level of scratch. Now, while there are dedicated engine cleaning products available, a few of which I've used myself before, they don't differ much, if at all, from that of a dilutable degreaser, which is what I'd be dousing the rear engine bay of this old Toyota MR2 with, prior to spritzing it over with a similarly versatile water-based dressing, both of which were bagged from CA Detailing, as were a handful of suitable brushes for agitation, on the promise I'd direct you to their choice inventory, which can currently be had for 10% less with the code GURU10. Before cleaning any engine bay, it's worth disconnecting the battery to prevent anything from shorting out, and while I'd also recommend covering and or bunging up the intake and alternator, they weren't really exposed or accessible on this car, so just went ahead and cracked on with an initial reduced pressure pre-rinse of all associated surfaces, to knock back any loose grit and grime, but also ensure everything was thoroughly wet down so that the subsequently applied cleaner could be carried to the various dirty nooks and crannies more effectively than it would be if applied dry. Being a concentrated concoction, the Koch Chemie Greenstar, which I'm ashamed to say I've never used, was first diluted down in a separate spray bottle, roughly 1 part product to 5 parts water, before being liberally applied first to the underside of the bonnet and engine cover, as while they're more of a body part than a bay one, would stick out like a sore thumb if left untouched, so made sense to treat them to a fairly thorough scrub, which was done with the supplied detail brushes here, but could also potentially be done with a mitt or even an old sponge if you're looking to keep things cheap and cheerful. And although on the day I dealt with the front end only after fully sorting the rear one to try and manage overspray, I'm lumping the footage together here just to illustrate the process in a slightly less disjointed fashion, which was ultimately wrapped up with another rinse to remove any freshly dislodged dirt and prevent the product residue from drying and potentially staining. So with the upper painted parts adequately stripped back, the lower ones were then dealt with in pretty much the same manner, as while it might be tempting to get stuck straight into the generally greasy mechanical components, these parts still tend to get gunked up in their own mulchy and organic way, so need to be methodically dealt with in order to be able to subsequently frame and complement the freshly cleaned engine. And the benefit of using a universal type cleaner over a dedicated one is that they're generally safe enough to be used on painted parts like these, while also being capable of stripping stubborn grease and grime back from more rough and robust surfaces, both of which you'll find a fair few of in an engine bay. And although this video is supposed to be about how few tools and products you technically need to complete the task, I would recommend adding a barrel type brush into the manky mix if you can, as they're great for accessing awkward cracks and crevices that a normal one or your hands alone might not be able to. Plus their soft synthetic bristles are fairly forgiving, so you don't really have to worry about inflicting damage while working them back and forth. A standard bristled CA detailing brush was then used in part to sufficiently scrub the remaining engine componentry, from the plastic valve cover to the aluminium block itself, with the barrel brush again being utilised to access the tighter spots and deeper recesses. And while a relatively straightforward water-based clean like this won't fully transform every surface, as polish, wire wool, sandpaper and even spray paint would really be required for that, would still have things looking considerably better than before, so cracked on with that in mind until I felt everywhere had been adequately brushed over, under and in between. I finished the dedicated clean up front, which was a comparatively straightforward affair, but one you obviously won't have to bother with if dealing with a front engine car. And only once I felt everywhere had been adequately agitated did I go ahead and commit to rinsing both ends off and out one last time, which when it comes to areas like this is always a bit of a balancing act between adequately ridding them of encapsulated dirt and chemical residue while not unnecessarily blasting sensitive parts for any longer than they need to be, which you just kind of get a feel for the more you perform cleans like these. But if doing so gives you the heebie-jeebies, then less is probably more, as a clean engine bay is of no great value if it doesn't work properly afterwards. So while things are still pretty sodden, I like to go ahead and douse everything, including the previously cleaned painted parts, with a decent quality water-based dressing, in this case CarPro's Perl product, which had been previously diluted down 1 to 3 with water as it's far too thick to use neat, which again will serve to naturally transport the ceramic enriched rejuvenator to every square inch of the engine bay without you having to do a whole lot of work. And in order to avoid an uneven patchy finish, don't recommend being a tight arse with your application, and instead advise fully saturating things with product before leaving it to thoroughly soak in. To give both the engine the opportunity to dry off a bit, as well as the dressing the chance to even out at its own pace, I then went on to treat the rest of the car to a good contact wash, as I'm generally not comfortable leaving things covered in overspray and splatter unless maybe the heavens are about to open, which surprisingly they weren't here. And it doesn't have to be anything massively in depth. A simple pre-rinse, contact wash, re-rinse and final towel dry should be enough to leave things looking relatively fresh and uncontaminated. And if you're wondering what the upturned bucket's about, it was to try and protect the alien fungus that had sprung up from the cracks in case it was some kind of endangered species. Now, while plenty of people will be happy to just leave it at that, which technically you can, I like to go back and wipe everything over to mop up any pooled excess and leave a more uniform finish that doesn't scream desperately doused in dressing to cover a multitude of sins. But doing so not only evens things out, but also provides the opportunity for a final quality control check before committing to reconnecting the battery and test firing the engine up. So, for the sake of a few extra minutes work, in my mind at least, is definitely worth doing. Before reconnecting the battery and priming the pumps, the only other thing I'd recommend doing following a fairly thorough clean would be to lubricate the latches and catches with a bit of WD-40 or similar. I think the silicone variant would be more appropriate, but the standard formulation, which is all I had to hand here, is certainly better than nothing. Then aside from grabbing some snazzy aftershots to show people at parties how clean your engine really is, can crank it over and let it thoroughly warm through. So all in all, I think the initial aim of illustrating how two simple products can combine to breathe life back into a dirty old engine bay was accomplished here, as the MR2's previously neglected one was now looking a whole lot better for its degrease and dressing double whammy. Obviously there were still bits that would have benefited from being removed and painted or polished, but a full-on disassembly detail is kind of another job altogether. Now, if you like the look of any of the stuff featured here or need to restock, then CA Detailing has you covered with 10% off whatever tickles your fancy. And if you think you know of any better engine cleaning product combos, then do feel free to share them in the comments below.